Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Well, hello, everyone. Before I ask RJ and Sarah how you guys are doing, I want to say, up front, there will be no discussion of any skin conditions in this episode. There will be nothing bathroom related. I have
You won't gag.
I've never received as much feedback about the Mockingcast as I have about the most recent episode about the P word.
People in my church loved it. I'm just going to say.
Well, it was certainly memorable.
At least the ones who did told me. The ones who didn't did not.
It was a risk. I didn't realize how much of a risk it was. So thank you, people, for sticking with us. If you have stuck with us, if you haven't, well, let's just hope. I hope your skin
we lost
clears.
You forever.
I hope your skin clears entirely. But yeah,
get that goiter dealt with.
Wow. Pimple popping, not for the faint of heart, and we are not going there again. A friend of mine said he was listening, and he said, "Oh, this is how much Dave doesn't want to talk about politics." And I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh my God, that
was
so
a very.
funny.
I said, "You see right through me, my friend."
So today, all politics is what you're saying, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, we're just
24/7.
reverse course. Well, how RJ, your skin does look pretty clear today.
Does it?
Yeah, that's
okay.
that Florida
if you say
sun.
So.
Sarah, yours once again looks amazing.
Oh gosh, thank you.
How are you guys doing? What's new?
We did spring break last week, which was awesome. We went to St. Simon's, where our beloved Kim and David, our church grandparents, as we call them, have a home there. So we, hung out in their heated pool and ate a lot of fried oysters and walked down to the beach and basically just RJ's life is what we did. It was awesome.
I prefer raw oysters, but
yeah.
continue.
Oh, we ate those too. We
Okay,
ate
good.
all the oysters. It was very fun. It was good to just in the middle of what is such a crazy time in the church to actually get that much time with Josh felt like nuts. It was like, oh my gosh, look, you're here with us. So that was really, really nice.
That's
really
amazing.
Nice. Yeah.
That's you sound rested.
It was great. It was really good. And it feels like a kind of echo of, what's to come in the summer. So that's always exciting.
Nice.
Yeah.
RJ, how's spring break life?
No. My spring break starts next week.
Okay.
No.
And I really need it.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
And I'm an extrovert and I love people. Let me just say this. I love people and I'm kind of peopled out.
Yeah.
Because we have this thing where I am in South Florida where we have, the quote unquote season. And we've been in the season now for about, definitely 3 months, maybe as many as 4 or 5 months. And everything is just heightened. There's endless social things, and there's the boat shows happening right now. And traffic is terrible, and at this point in the season, everyone's just a little exhausted and ready for a break. So we're going to be in Houston because both of our oldest boys are there, and some of our closest friends are there, and the weather's going to be lovely. So
oh my God, you're going to eat such good food. That's what I miss
such
the
good
most.
food, and I'm really looking forward to being away for a few days.
Everyone, there's only so many boat shows you can attend. Is what's
I don't
going
actually
on here.
go to the boat show. I just hope that my people can get to church because we're right next to the boat show, and it shuts down all the roads around us. So it's fun. It's lots.
Oh my
of
gosh,
fun.
that's so. It's like West Palm Beach Mardi Gras.
It is, and it's endless. If it's not, it's the marathon, it's the boat show, it's it's just all this autism walk. It's just one thing after another, which are all good things. But
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I just got back. I was my final trip of the of the new year. I was in Birmingham visiting my parents and preaching down there at the Advent, and ran into so many people who are listeners to this podcast, and just folks with tears in their eyes talking about how we accompany them on every walk, and and through sort of life's peaks and valleys, and that means a lot to me. So that was a really sweet time, and but also been traveling so much that I am glad to be home until and for the next 7 weeks, until not only my new book comes out, but also the New York Mockingbird Conference, where Sarah and I will be. RJ unfortunately is missing this year, but it is filling up. We've only got, I think, about 10% of the tickets are left. So
Whoa.
if folks want to come, you need to register now. And I just every little piece that keeps falling into place. Like we just Sandra McCracken, who's playing a concert, just is bringing now an amazing accompanist, and we're going to do a tour of there's a Caspar David Friedrich exhibit at the Met that my father's going to lead a tour of. That's
and there are new bathrooms. I hear the bathrooms have been renovated at St. George's.
At St. George's. That's the sort, you believe it when you see it, but that. A wing and a prayer is how I think of the bathroom situation.
I will not recognize this conference if this bathroom's supposed to be done. I'll be like, where am I? I need a child-sized toilet to try to squat on.
When the church was built, it was literally built in a field, and if you had to go to the bathroom, you just went out the doors and just went into the field. And now it's not a field anymore.
I promise no bathroom talk. I promise no bathroom talk.
Sorry, guys.
Here it was my fault. I went there first.
Sorry.
No, I did.
Well, let's jump into the articles. There's a lot to talk about today. Some amazing things are appearing. This is first one's from the New York Times. Callie Holterman wrote a fascinating article about too many trends. Too many trends. For the past few years, opening up social media has felt like standing in front of a fire hose of fashion and internet fads and cranking open the nozzle full blast. The new IT water bottles are anointed almost quarterly. Influencers urge their viewers to style themselves as coastal grandmothers, ballet dancers, indie coquettes, looks that have little in common besides the consumption they require. To keep up would leave most people broke, not to mention disoriented. And while a majority of these crazes are labeled Gen Z trends, members of that generation may be the ones most fatigued by the churn. They are aware, sometimes painfully, that their insecurities are being harnessed for someone else's bottom line. But awareness does not equal liberation. Understanding the mechanisms at play does not always mean they can escape them, although many are trying. We tend to think of new trends as a means of demonstrating that we know what's cool and new, or as a way to take part in a bigger collective moment. For decades, critics have rightly pointed out that following trends facilitates a consumer capitalist culture, but it can also be experimental, playful, and even fun. Lately, though, trends feel more overwhelming. Young people I spoke with described an online trend ecosystem that resembles a soupy floodplain of fads, trends that are at once flimsy and a genuine source of stress for young people eager to fit in. The insecurity that young people feel when they don't have the IT item is amplified when there's a new IT item every week. Francesca Oliva, an 18-year-old college freshman at Hopewell Junction in New York, said, when you have 18,000 different core identities being thrown at you, like eclectic grandpa or coastal grandmother or office siren, you're like, what am I supposed to be? As she watched even more trends come and go, each one seemingly requiring a new wardrobe, Francesca took a step back. People that continuously are buying these clothes just trying to fit in, it has to feel exhausting. As someone who's just observing that, it's exhausting. So a sense of consumption fatigue has set in. Others are pushing underconsumption core, which encourages users to show off their off-trend but still thoroughly wearable clothes on TikTok. Still more have documented their attempts at a low-buy year in which they vowed to cut back on shopping. Such neatly packaged repudiations of trendiness strike Abner Gordon, a 21-year-old college student in New York City, as ironic. In a weird way, he says, I think being anti-trend is very trendy. I just like the fact that sort of normcore, kind of dad core can be passed off as cool, which it hasn't always been passed off.
The Adam
Passed offable.
Sandler look. Yeah,
The
yeah.
Adam
Oh,
Sandler
yeah.
Tell my
look.
Oh,
sons.
yeah. Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts about this. I mean, one thought I actually have, it's so interesting to hear this perspective from a younger person because I see all these trends. And I actually remember this moment, I think it was last year, where we had just had like Tomato Girl Summer, which is very like
Barefoot
pared
Boy Summer?
down.
Okay.
Yeah. Very pared down, sun-kissed makeup. And then right into like, it was like fall, winter, it was Mob Wife was the look.
Yep.
And all of these people, women, were like, oh my God, like like there was these articles that were like, this is like a whole other wardrobe. This is like, this is Carmela Soprano. This is, animal print fur coat, whatever, giant gold earrings. This is so different from what we were doing before. And I felt really lucky to be this age because there's something kind of magical for me, at least. And I have friends who've said this about turning 40. And by then you sort of know what you're comfortable in and you know your style. And which is not to say you can't play right with trends, but it feels a lot more like play at this age and a lot less like this like crazy pressure.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite accounts are women my age who talk about, and you guys, I'm sure remember this, when we would go out in our 20s, all women dress like real estate agents, or like legal, like you're
High-waisted.
Exactly. The hat with the peplum and then the fitted skirt. And then you had this like very specific chunky jewelry. And maybe you even wore a blazer, right?
Yeah.
Like to go out on like a Friday or Saturday night. And we really were all walking around like we were like the administrative assistant at a law firm. But that was like, it was like a very clear, like dictated look. And I think the gift of that look was that it was a good 5 years. You could wear that, and look pulled together. And now it's so rapidly changing that it does kind of exhaust me even to look at it from the outside, but I'm so grateful that I'm at a stage in life where I don't feel this pang of like, oh, well, this is what we're wearing, right?
Yeah.
Because it's that must wear you down.
So you can engage from a place of humor and play.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the younger, and a lot of this,
I'm old enough that I can be like, that's not for me,
Yeah.
But like, I think when you're in your 20s, it feels like everything could be for you. And it's really hard to pin down what is and what isn't. So
acceleration in all things.
Yes.
And this is how it's rubber's meeting the road. I think this is a little bit more pronounced among women, but
oh, for sure. Yeah.
I do.
Now it's fisherman chic, which is like hilarious to me because I'm like, what 25-year-old
wasn't equestrian chic like a few years ago?
Oh,
yes.
Wasn't everyone?
Oh, that was yeah. But
we talked about that.
I feel like it's like so funny to me. I'm like, are we all dressing like Popeye? Like, what is the you know what I mean? Like fisherman. I'm like, I don't know.
Well, living in a college town where I am, we always see every year. It's like, oh, all the girls have jeans that are they're all sort of like you can see their ankles and the waists are really high. And like 3 years ago that was different, but it was like a uniform. There was one year where everyone dressed like Han Solo. It was and you could see memes of it. And it does strike me as exhausting, although of course there's creativity involved, and I love the creative aspect of it. And I get, I think, yes, I do think it's like a sort of a young woman thing, but also, I remember the trends of my youth, and I think of them fondly. I mean, grunge has come back, is coming back. I don't know if it can come back, but we were watching the SNL documentary last about the music on SNL, and the whole thing about Nirvana when they came on and were with Charles Barkley. I mean, that was a trend, and it was really a fun one for at least where I was sitting. I guess there was a lot of pain involved. But RJ, what do you think?
It's all I think about.
The least trendy person I know. Like, how do you rise above it, RJ?
I don't. I just am deeply anxious about other things.
Oh.
I don't have the mental time and energy to The last time I thought about this at all was when I took my son to the South Florida Fair, which we do every year, which is just super fun. And he rides every possible ride, and I try not to throw up. But seeing the middle schoolers, and specifically the middle school girls walking around, and every pack had not necessarily its
'Cause
own.
they are packs, absolutely.
Yeah, total packs.
Yeah, total packs.
And they were all every pack was dressed exactly the same.
Yeah.
And the fashion might change pack to pack, but they were all dressed exactly the same. Sometimes it was the long T-shirt that covers the short shorts look. Sometimes it was like sweatpants with a T-shirt look, but they were always dressed the same. And my initial thought was, it's safe. It's about safety. Yeah. It's about safety in numbers. It's about being part of a pack. It's about acceptance. It's
belonging.
about it's belonging. It's about not sticking out too much. You know, like now I'm wearing what my friend is wearing. So even if someone else thinks it looks dumb, we're doing it together. So there's strength in that. I'm not going to be singled out. So I think it's a combination of wanting to stick out and wanting to say, I understand this, I'm cool, but it's also, how can I do that in a way that I will escape judgment pretty much, right? Like trendiness is sort of about, to some degree, escaping judgment. I mean, I feel that too, because like when I think about trends, it's when I go to soccer practice and I see all the dads wearing tight khakis, which sort of taper at the ankles, with on a cloud sort of sport loafer type shoes. You know what I'm talking about, Dave, right?
Yes.
And I don't know what you're talking about.
And golf polos.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
I'm here for the butt, though.
When I'm like, well, yeah, but I'm like, shit, I don't own any of that.
Right.
I own none of that.
Yeah.
Should I? Do I need to buy a pair of on a cloud shoes? Maybe I do. Do I need to wear more golf shirts? Maybe I do. I don't really like golf. Some tight khakis. I think my khakis are kind of tight, but not that tight. And then my boys, because I actually have two Gen Zers. I got a 20-year-old and a 22-year-old. And the 20-year-old, who's probably the most up with things, who just, bleached his hair so he kind of looks like Eminem. And he's now
he
wearing
looks very cool,
very baggy jeans with like kind of ripped bottoms with tassels and stuff. And I'm like, what the hell are you wearing?
Yeah.
But that's what he and all his friends wear.
Yeah.
So I'm like, apparently that now is the thing. But I don't know how much they think about trendiness or how much they just do it. But they're also boys. So like it's a little bit.
But they're still trying on identities. I mean, this is all about
sure.
It's about escaping judgment and
but my
22-year-old the correct identity or
my
the
22-year-old
identity
is now working. So he like cut his Samson Viking red hair and it's shorter, and he's wearing button downs and khakis, and he probably has a pair of on a clouds. I don't know if he
probably does.
Maybe he does. Is that what they're called? That's what they're
for
called,
the
right?
weekend. Yeah,
they're called ons, is what how people refer to them here.
See, I'm not even trendy enough to know what they're called.
Well,
Excuse me, Charlottesville.
It's a look. Has Annie started to have to deal with this?
We're totally in this. What I will say, so what is interesting is that she was at a public school here in Nashville, in, the really bougie area. And it was literally like uniform. You wore butterfly shorts, which y'all don't know what those are, but they're like little athletic shorts, and the sides like flutter, so it almost looks like a little skirt. Oh, they're mira que fancy. And then you wore it with a very specific t-shirt, and for her school you had to wear school t-shirts, and this was the kicker. This is how we're in a fancy area. It had the name of her school, but it was in the Seaside font.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you're like, is that a Seaside shirt? Oh, no, that little girl just goes to that bougie public school. And now, of course, they're in this whole different environment with all this diversity and girls in hijabs and blah, 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 blah. And so the first thing the kids said to me when they came home, they were like, we don't know how to dress. Like, everybody wears everything there. Yeah. And so it's a whole different.
Awesome.
It kind of is. I mean, I really love that. Like that they said like no one makes fun of anybody for what they wear, because everybody wears all these different things. And it feels a lot more like, I think, like a big city might feel, right? Like it's just there, like everything's sort of welcome in this way. So I've been grateful for that for them, but there's still, I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it. There's still deep anxiety for a middle school girl about what she's going to wear. Like you can't fix that, Maybe if I put on a hijab, I don't know.
Man. Yeah, maybe
that's
the secret.
Answer.
There it is. It's the secret.
Remember that phase when you wore a hijab? That really threw your neighbors for
Or
It
even a
did.
burqa. I mean, just cover it
Yeah,
all.
I mean,
just go full. Like, why
here we
mess around? Just cover it
go.
all. Yeah,
We're
just
gonna
right.
get so many emails. Okay, let's
no, well,
change the
I
subject.
just think the acceleration of all things, but this is yet another example of it, and I think,
Yeah.
hey, we need relief.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from
See me, but
middle
don't see
school
me.
trends to something. This is about LeBron James and the limits of
LeBron
nepotism.
James.
People who are following what's going on with LeBron James may know that his son, Bronny James, has been playing for the Lakers, and it's been, to put it mildly, a whole thing. In January, Bronny James had his worst game of the season. This is, by the way, by Ross Anderson in The Atlantic. He had his worst game of the season. In 15 minutes, he missed all of his shots and turned the ball over 3 times. The next morning on First Take, which is ESPN's flagship morning show, Stephen A. Smith made Bronny the subject of one of his trademark rants. For more than 4 uninterrupted minutes, he pleaded with LeBron as a father to stop exposing his son. LeBron does not seem to have taken kindly to Smith's unsolicited counsel, and at the Lakers game on March 6th, near the end of the third quarter, he approached Smith in his courtside seat.
Whoa.
He loomed over him, you can see the footage, in a manner that does not usually accompany friendly chatter, and he instructed Smith in no uncertain terms to leave his son alone, shall we put it that way. LeBron has himself to blame for the sad media spectacle of Bronny's first season, Anderson writes. By all appearances, it was LeBron who made sure Bronny got drafted, first by puffing him up, saying publicly that his son was already better than many active NBA players. LeBron also made it known that he himself would play for whichever team drafted Bronny. Then he goes on to say, LeBron's own father was never in his life. He was still sleeping on friends' couches late into his childhood. Parenthood means something deep to him. He has described playing with his son as the biggest accomplishment of a career that includes 4 NBA titles and 4 MVP awards. There was something beautiful about him using the leverage that he's amassed in the basketball world to make that happen by dragging his firstborn boy into the league. Was it nepotism? Sure. But human life is shot through with all kinds of advantages of birth, and Bronny's didn't seem like the most important or unfair. LeBron deserves some empathy. Nearly all parents experience something akin to his naive desire, a wish to give their kid the future of their dreams while shielding them from pain and disappointment. LeBron may have felt some anguish as he watched his son this season. Few things are as excruciating as watching your kids suffer. No amount of money or fame can insure against it. LeBron may well be haunted by his role in bringing about that suffering. But even one of the greatest athletes of our age doesn't have the power to protect his adult son from criticism. Now, by appearing to threaten Smith, LeBron has not only acted like a petty strongman, he has drawn new attention to his son's disappointing season, enlarging the very story he sought to suppress. It's a rare misstep from someone so media savvy who has stayed almost entirely scandal-free across a long career that began when he was still a teenager. The mistake is perhaps understandable. The emotions of parenthood are gigantic. They can knock anyone off their game, even the great LeBron James. Now, RJ, I'm sure you're aware of this story. What's your go-to? I know as a father, I certainly... it brings up a lot of emotions because I want to very much protect my kid from especially embarrassment and public ridicule. But what do you think of this? How you follow the whole thing?
Well, yeah, I haven't followed it super closely. I was aware of it. I can't stand Stephen A. Smith. He's
he's such an asshole.
He's really smart.
I mean, I
and good at what
actually
he
know
does.
who he is.
He's the biggest. He's the biggest commentator there is out there.
Yeah, and ESPN pays him, $15 or $20 million a year to be on absolutely everything. Like, I'm not a huge fan of his. And first of all, and Bronny is a good basketball player. Like, he's young. He's 20. I feel badly for him. Like, I just can't imagine having LeBron James as your father.
Yeah.
And also it is, most kids, what you find, I think, either do what their parents did or do the exact opposite. And the fact that Bronny sort of chose to go into the family business, I think to some degree speaks volumes for probably the kind of dad that LeBron is. I think he's probably a good father. And yeah, it probably was unwise of him to do what he did in public. He probably he could have easily, done it sort of, behind the scenes, talk to Stephen A. Smith, but he felt a need to defend his son in public, which I get, and he did the best he could. I just think it's a hard situation. And yes, you want your kids to succeed, but you also don't want to be either a helicopter parent or a snowplow parent that is saving your kids from suffering because you can't do it anyway. And I hope it ends well. I hope that I think Bronny still could go on to a successful NBA career, or maybe he ends up coaching, or I don't know what. But that he finds some peace, and LeBron finds some peace with how things are, and that there's not too much disappointment or self judgment, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting that I like it when he says that he's avoided so many scandals, like the perils of ambition, of ego, of temptation have not been the thing that it's what has sort of knocked LeBron off his pedestal a little bit is love, frankly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's a powerful force. It's the most powerful force.
Yeah, it's funny. LeBron is, if for people that don't like him, that like Michael Jordan better, or they like Kobe Bryant better, or something like that, a big knock on him is that he's not selfish enough, and he lacks a killer instinct. That like Kobe and Michael, like they're kind of psychos.
Yeah.
And LeBron clearly like is incredibly competitive, but he seems a little bit more human, and that's almost to his detriment. That he's not a killer, a quote unquote killer, which when you're talking about sports is a good thing.
Yeah.
Or business for that matter. At least if you're a man. So it's interesting. Sarah, what are your thoughts on sports?
Well, I want to start by saying I love to see nepotism in a black family, because God knows the rest of us have been doing it for a long time. So, it reminds me of the Old Testament reading from this past week, and how like God is promising Abram at that point, but that he will have all these descendants, and and they are about to make this, quote unquote contract. And then basically, God makes Abraham take a nap and then fulfills the contract himself, thus proving that we don't really actually bring anything to the table. And I think it makes me think about how much we long to be God in our children's lives.
Yes.
Like how much we want to step in, and we want to rescue them, and we want to redeem their situation, and we want to fix everything. And because we are not God, like what a total disaster that is often.
Yeah.
But that it comes, I loved that Old Testament reading because it's just full, for me personally, and this probably is not true for everybody, and that's fine, but full of so much fatherly love.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like this comes from such a beautiful place for LeBron James, but we're not God. And so it backfires pretty quickly on us as parents.
Yeah. I mean, I think to myself, the thing that makes me most upset in the world is, I wish I could say it was some form of like global injustice, but I'll tell you what makes me more upset, and that can make me almost homicidal, is when one of my children is cruel to one of his siblings, and uses he's coming at it from insecurity or something like that, or he's had a tough day and he takes it out on his,
and there's testosterone surging through his system. But yes, yeah.
But for me as a father, that sends me into a murderous rage, which is ironic because that's the thing I'm trying to prevent. But I don't have control over it. I have to talk to a therapist about it. But it's like I want to protect one of my other sons from being belittled and by someone who's supposed to love him, and that is. I recognize this impulse, and I think it's out of love, but there's a lot of control, and I'm working out my own issues. There's no question about that.
Right.
As a middle child, and
transference and vicariousness. Yeah.
But we can't protect our kids as much as we wish we could, and yet that's also where some of our Achilles heels is, this thing that's so beautiful to be devoted to and want to protect your child, when left unchecked can turn pretty ugly. Because you look at the video and LeBron's much larger than Stephen A. Smith, and
Mm.
LeBron is, he's intimidating as can be, and he's acting as intimidating, like even more intimidating. And but I guess a lot of people also think, oh, Stephen A. Smith had it coming. You can't just talk smack like that for a profession and not expect to occasionally get called out on it. But anyway, thanks for indulging me on that one. This next one is a fascinating piece from Oliver Berkman. Oliver Berkman, who spoke at Mockingbird years ago and has a wonderful new book out called Meditations for Mortals, which I've been reading. It's like a retreat for the mind, is what he calls it. You might call it like a secular devotional, but it's just absolutely doused in low anthropology and grace and compassion, and I couldn't recommend it more highly. And so he wrote this in his newsletter, The Imperfectionist, about toxic preconditions. I was pleased to discover the other day the exact phrase for an awful lot of what holds us back from living saner, happier, and more meaningfully productive lives. Toxic preconditions. What's a toxic precondition? The social scientist James Horton explores why people who'd like to do more writing fail to do that writing. He blames, quote, misguided beliefs about what writing must be in order for it to be worth it. But this isn't just a problem for writers. Toxic preconditions lie in wait everywhere. Consider the ubiquitous modern-day search for the ideal morning routine, featuring the optimal morning sunlight protocol and so forth. It starts off innocently enough with a list of 3 or 4 things you might beneficially do each morning in order to feel happier and get more done. But then it morphs, shockingly easily and quickly, into a list of 7 or 8 or 9 things you absolutely must do each morning if you're to stand any chance of being happy or productive. And just like that, you've turned a system for living better into an obstacle to living better. Because every time something gets in the way of the routine, you'd find yourself feeling at a major disadvantage and or mired in self-criticism with no option but to promise yourself you'll start afresh tomorrow and do things perfectly from then on. A more wide-reaching form of toxic precondition is what Anne-Laure Lecomte in her book Tiny Experiments calls the tyranny of purpose. The oppressive idea that the activities with which we fill our days must be leading up to something, to some final and finished state of having arrived at our destination in life, if they're to be worth doing in the first place. Which brings us the fundamental toxic precondition lurking behind every other toxic precondition. The strong desire we have for some kind of guarantee before we embark on a new activity, or even just allow ourselves to relax into life, that it'll all unfold safely and securely, that we'll retain the feeling of being in control. That's what you're surrendering in a small way when you go ahead and write a few hundred words of your novel with no certainty that it'll be any good. Or when you move forward with the day's projects despite not having carried out your morning routine to the letter. It's also what you're surrendering when you decide to cut yourself a bit more slack in life. In other words, we don't erect toxic preconditions simply because we're irrational, self-defeating idiots. We do it because we want to feel secure and to avoid the risk of experiencing emotions we're unsure we'd be able to handle. This explains why it can be so powerfully liberating and action triggering to understand that the uncertainty and insecurity you imagine you're avoiding is in fact how things already are for you. As the great Elizabeth Gilbert puts it, you are afraid of surrender because you don't want to lose control. But you never had control. All you had was anxiety. Getting past toxic preconditions is less a matter of being willing to step into the unknown than realizing that you're already in the unknown. I found this to be very helpful, not just as a writer, but as someone who does anything, who thinks that it's not worth going on a hike if it's not perfect outside, if we don't go to the exact right place, if we're not optimizing. It's not worth a date night if you're not completely rested and just absolutely had the best day ever. These toxic preconditions, I think, are things that hold us back from doing things we'd enjoy. Out of fear that we won't get the result that we almost think we're promised or something. So but it does, of course, relate to writing hugely. if I don't have a 4-hour chunk to write, then it's not worth even putting pen to paper. If I'm not in the right room with the right people, the right noise, and like I've slept well the night before, then I shouldn't even try. And that starts out as something which can be beneficial, but when it turns into an ironclad law, it prevents the thing that it's trying to engineer, which is fascinating to me. But that's my 2 cents. Sarah, what do you think about toxic preconditions?
It occurs to me that Lent might be a season of toxic preconditions.
Huh.
Because we think
Explain.
a lot about, taking on a discipline or giving something up or blah, 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 blah. And of course, this year I did what, probably 80% of the people in my life try to do, which is give up social media for Lent, and have done a shit job of it. And this morning I was having my coffee before I got the kids up. I'd check my email, I'd look at my text messages, and then my brain was like, you should look at social media. So I looked at social media for, a minute or two, and then I was like, gosh, okay, I'm just gonna pray, because the other thing it makes me think of is our prayer lives.
Huh.
And how we feel like we have to have perfect conditions for prayer lives. I mean, and one thing when we talk about internet trends is these oh my God, these women that must set up it's so hard for me to not say the F word right now, must set up their cell phones to record. First it's so the first thing in the morning, I get up at 5 a.m. and I unload the dishwasher, and then I have my blah, blah, blah protein yogurt. And then they must set it up in their living room, because then they're they've got their Bible out with their highlighter, and they're and then I spend time with the Lord. And it's I get up too late. Then I let my kids sleep later than they should, so their mornings are just peachy. And I stare at my phone for too long. And as you well know, I take my children to school in a bathrobe. I mean, just my life does not look like that. And so you can already feel well, I definitely don't have time to acknowledge that I'm beloved by God this morning. So anyway, this morning I was like, oh God, I should just pray. And I just put everything down, and I said some stuff to myself. Hopefully God heard it. And then I was like, okay, well now I've got to get the kids. And this was a thing I noticed in my prayer life that is a thing, and it can't just be a thing for me, but where we pray and we're just Lord, give me this, thank you for this, amen. And I thought, I had this moment, I was just about to get up, and I was like, I didn't listen for God to say anything just now. I'm just going to sit and listen to what God says about me for a minute before I get up. And it was very basic things today's probably going to be a good day, and your kids really love you. That was kind of it. And then I got up, but I think about how often toxic preconditions keep us from acknowledging the presence of God, which I just want to say, God doesn't need us to acknowledge God. We need to acknowledge God for us. That's the thing, right? So yeah, I think Lent feels very toxic precondition heavy, because, it's well, if I can't stay off of social media, or if I can't, whatever your kind of discipline is, if I can't not have a glass of wine every night, then F it. I might as well just do, I might as well succumb, right? And I mean, Josh always says this, and I love it. It's so foreign to my sort of black and white thinking. But he's like, you just got to tip the Coke machine a couple times before it knocks over. And it's a really gracious way of saying, don't be so hard on yourself. And things don't have to be perfect for you to know how forgiven you are.
You say that phrase again. You have to tip the Coke machine.
You have to tip the Coke machine a couple times before you knock it over.
Oh, I like that.
So yeah, it's it's not all going to happen at once, So,
RJ, what about you? Toxic preconditions.
It made me think about relationships, to be honest with you, and people who are like, well, I can't be in a relationship with you unless you subscribe to X, Y, and Z, or we see eye to eye on these things, or and not just in friendships, but also that it made me think about romantic relationships, and that when I hear people who maybe are single but would like to be with someone, and they're like, but they have to be this tall, and they have to be this political party, and they have to
It's
be
always with the
um,
height.
or whatever it is. They've got their list of preconditions.
Nothing wrong with the
Um,
short king, ladies.
And that just feels like when you fall in love, it'll be the opposite of what you think it is. And the faster you can let go of your expectations of the kind of person that you think you want, the more likely you actually are to find someone that you will actually love and will actually love you. So it made me think of that. And then, Dave, what you were talking about, the need for kind of certainty and safety and control, and to know that everything's going to turn out okay. I think what I struggle with is, on the one hand, of course, I believe that 100%. Like someday, the three of us and our wives and children are going to be in heaven together forever, and we're going to look back and be like, what the hell were we so worried about all the time? Why did we waste so much energy on things that were passing away and things that sort of didn't matter and seemed to matter? And I don't think we'll lament that much, because we'll be too focused on just partying and enjoying our lives.
Singing.
Yeah,
Remember last
apparently
episode?
a lot of singing. But I think so. I believe that, but I also know that, like, God in his grace and mercy and wisdom has, like, put me and my family through some things which I think were for his glory and our good, but they were not fun.
Yeah.
And, like, I don't know if I want to do that again. So it's like, I trust God ultimately. But he also makes me a little nervous, because he's always doing stuff, that, like, I don't really necessarily want him to do. And I don't like that. And so that's what I'm trying to, I think that's what I try to navigate is, yes, I trust you, Lord, but also I would like life to not be too hard, even though I kind of know that that's how you work,
Yeah,
and how,
well, it
death and
sounds like
resurrection.
to me like a toxic precondition is almost a superstition by which we can control our lives. Like, if I do this, then take the exact right steps, then I will have the book I want, or
as long as I make no
relationship I
mistakes at
want.
all.
Yeah, and what you're saying is that God sort of will happen to you.
Yes.
And I love what you said, Sarah, about that if we're waiting for the perfect time to acknowledge that we are loved and treasured by God, it's not going to happen, because part of that love is the fact that he loves us when we're in a mess and
Right.
and scrambling.
He loves us in the basement.
Frantic in
Yeah.
the basement.
Yeah.
Well, when I think about toxic preconditions as sort of as a mode of making decisions, this is a fascinating, heavy one that Pat Higgins, a listener, sent us in the Wall Street Journal. By Jason Zweig, wrote about the last decision by the world's leading thinker on decisions. We've talked about Daniel Kahneman a few times over the years, the Nobel Prize winning social scientist who wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow. But he and his partner Amos Tversky have, like, almost single-handedly erected a lot of the ways we think about decision making and agency today. This is what he writes. In mid-March 2024, Daniel Kahneman flew from New York to Paris to unite with his daughter and her family. They spent days walking around the city, going to museums and the ballet, savoring soufflés and chocolate mousse. Around March 22nd, Kahneman, who had turned 90 that month, also started emailing a personal message to several dozen of the people he was closest to. His email explained, "This is a goodbye letter I am sending friends to tell them that I am on my way to Switzerland, where my life will end on March 27th. By most accounts, although not his own, Kahneman was still in reasonably good physical and mental health when he chose to die. Some are still struggling to come to terms with his decision, including the author of the article, who was a co-author with him on several things." He goes on to cite the groundbreaking research that Kahneman and Tversky had conducted, which overturned decades-long assumptions that human beings are rational. By that, they meant that people's beliefs are internally consistent, that they make decisions based on all the relevant information and preferences that don't change. In a series of simple, brilliant experiments, Kahneman and Tversky refuted that definition of rationality. But Kahneman never contended that people are irrational. Instead, he argued that they are inconsistent, emotional, and easily fooled, most easily of all by themselves. Self-delusion helps sustain most people, he told me years ago. In short, he made the case that people are neither rational nor irrational, they are simply human. Kahneman often said that decades of studying the human mind had taught him how to recognize, but not how to avoid, these pitfalls of decision making. I think Danny wanted, above all, to avoid a long decline, to go out on his terms, to own his own death. Maybe the principles of good decision making that he had so long espoused, rely on data, don't trust most intuitions, view the evidence in the broadest possible perspective, had little to do with his ultimate decision. His friends and family say that Kahneman's choice was purely personal. He didn't endorse assisted suicide for anyone else and never wished to be viewed as advocating it for others. His final email went on to indicate that he felt that it soon would. I have believed since I was a teenager that the miseries and indignities of the last years of life are superfluous, and I am acting on that belief. Yet, Zweig writes, one of his most treasured principles was the importance of reconsidering. Most people hate changing their minds, he wrote, but I like to change my mind. It means I've learned something. Paul Slavic, a psychologist at the University of Oregon who befriended Kahneman more than 50 years ago, says, Danny was the type of person who would think long and hard about things, so I figured he must have thought about it very slowly and deliberately. Of course, those of us who spend our lives studying decisions, we think a lot about the reasons for those decisions, but often the reasons aren't the reasons. They're feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends by asking, as death approaches, should we make the best of whatever time we have left with those we love the most, or should we spare them and ourselves from as much as possible of our inevitable decline? Is our death ours alone to own? It's a fascinating article about Kahneman, who discovered so much about the human, decision-making process. And it was the person who wrote in Thinking Fast and Slow that despite decades-long career of studying these things, he is still no closer to being able to implement any of the things that mattered when it came to his own decision-making. And the writer of the article goes on to say that he did treasure life. His family had been hounded by the Nazis when he was a kid in southern France, but that he had witnessed his mother dealing with dementia, and it had been profoundly disturbing for him to take care of her when she didn't even remember what hospital she was in, and that everyone seems to have suspected that was what was informing this. And despite saying that he trusts, looking to the broadest possible perspective, looking to trusted sources, almost every one of his friends and colleagues seemed to think this was a bad idea because he was still enjoying life so much. And yet he chose to ignore that advice. And it's a very sober outlook on end-of-life stuff, which I have a feeling we'll be talking about more and more as the years go on. I've got more to say
Because
about...
we're going to face the end of our lives. Is that what you mean?
I think it's just going to become more of an option for people.
Okay. I was like, because if we're like in our 70s still doing this, I mean...
That'll be wild.
What do you think
Can
about
you imagine?
I mean, I have so many thoughts. I think people need Jesus and therapy, and I think he probably needed a lot of both of those things and didn't get them. I think also, like, oh my God, grow a pair. Like, I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, you committed suicide. I mean, your family has to deal with that. Your friends have to deal with the repercussions of that. Now, listen, it's one thing if you have a terminal illness and you know that death is inevitable. You've got 6 months of solid suffering. That's a whole other bag of chips. But this is crazy. This is wild to me. I mean, it speaks of a massive ego. It speaks of a total inability to humble yourself enough to have people that you love take care of you. Like, I'm sort of low-key enraged by this I mean, it's also worth acknowledging, right? I come from a family that has suicide in it. And so I know what that looks like for generations afterwards. I mean, what example does that give to children? What example does that give to friends that you hit a certain age and, and also like, yeah, it's really disturbing. I mean, my grandmother had profound dementia. Forget
Yeah.
what hospital. Oh, she didn't know what hospital she was in. How hard was that? She didn't know who you were. She didn't know who she was. I mean, that's what dementia, that's when it gets scary. This guy was really easily freaked out. Like, you got to take care of your mother as she was losing her mind and died. What a privilege. What a hard and awful privilege, but also what a privilege. And for you to, this is too much. I want to resurrect him so I can yell at him. RJ, go.
It just makes me sad.
Yeah.
It makes me sad. I don't know what else to say about that. I mean, I think what you said, humbling yourself to be taken care of, like that is a big thing. Humbling yourself to be willing to be a burden. I'm not there yet, and I can imagine. I just don't want to be a burden. I just don't want to be a burden. It's like, well, guess what? You don't get. I guess you can choose. I guess you can, but I guess the alternative is death. Either
Right.
you're a burden or you die.
Right.
And you're right. He chose death over
which is what people do who
lack
like
of control. It really goes back to what we were talking about. It's a toxic precondition. I only want to live life if I can do it 100% on my own terms and not have the possibility of suffering for myself or anyone that I love. And if that's not the way I can live, then I'm just going to end it.
But that is suicide language.
Of course,
I mean,
it is.
It's like every letter that, every suicide letter is like, I don't want to be a burden on people anymore.
And no one ever who receives those letters almost ever thinks.
No one.
Like,
I've never
thank
heard
goodness,
anyone
I was
be like,
sick of
"Oh,
them."
they were such a burden.
Yeah.
You rob your loved ones of the ability of being a burden on them. Like that's a privilege.
Yes.
It creates an other-centeredness to be of service in that kind of way. I think is a profoundly powerful and I would say godly.
Yeah, taking
thing.
care of you might save someone's life.
Well, and I also I have to think of first you learn, then you earn, and then you return.
Denzel Washington.
It makes me think of him because some of my greatest, most wise people in my life are in their 90s. Like, he had more to share. He had more to give. Clearly, this man was a thinker. And just that whole thing. Like, oh, we're going to go to Paris and eat cheese and drink wine.
Or even if he didn't have anything left to give, his worth is not based on his production.
Totally. Yes. Of course.
Clearly, there's something that's offensive about this. I mean, I've read the books about the endless prolonging of life that has no standard to it. There's a pathology in that in like the medical system. And Atul Gawande, that's a great book. I think that if people haven't read it,
it's fabulous.
He's just not. This just wasn't that. That doesn't sound like that was the case here. It seems to be an act of control in the way that you don't control as a Christian. You don't control when you're born, and I believe that when you die is in God's hands, and there is something of an affront to it, especially when it's not unending mental anguish, which it doesn't sound like. It sounds like there's a pretense about it being this cold weighing of data, even though it also was, motivated by his experience of his mother, and really not wanting to be dependent, I think.
I do want to say real quick, because you just said this, and I know that's not what you think, but there are very, very faithful Christians out there who kill themselves, and that sometimes that is a part of the Christian life cycle, and mental illness is real, and and it causes us to do things that harm ourselves, and we are powerless to that. So
yes,
I know that's not what you meant. I just want to say that.
Qualification.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I hope if my compassion for people suffering from mental illness isn't apparent at this point,
right.
I don't know what to say.
Right.
But but there is, he was an atheist, and
Mhm.
there's something very atheistic about this, because
Yeah.
I believe that, frankly, God is a God of surprise, and you cannot know for certain what those next years are going to bring, and that you just can't. And
Mhm.
they could bring, only decline and the opportunity for other people to care for you. They could bring other things,
Could
like
be the happiest year of your life. I mean, you
it
just
could
don't
be.
know.
And so to presume is a scary thing, and I think it's a. The other thing I'm thinking about is, so when we were at Sundance, there was a film festival. There was a movie being shown called Life After. It was a documentary by a Canadian filmmaker, um, who named, I think, Reed Davenport, who is a guy with cerebral palsy, and he was talking about the right to die in Canada and how it had fallen disproportionately on disabled people,
Mm, mhm.
and how basically this option had sort of become something that was being encouraged by government agencies that didn't want to pay for the care of disabled people. And what he noticed was all of this discussion about the right to die was happening all among what he would call the able-bodied community. And if you talk to the disabled folks on whom it was first an option, and then soon it was sort of being slowly urged on them, he found it to be a cop out from having to, think about how to take care of people. He avoids religious voices in the thing because he wants to speak to sort of people on the left who always see that the right to die is a compassionate thing, when he's saying actually it had become, for many of us in this sphere, had become seen as like, why would you ever want to go on living if
Mm.
you've got this many problems. And what had started out as an option had become almost like a mandate, in which was deeply dehumanizing. And so it was this strange documentary that people at Sundance didn't really quite know how to deal with, because it was pro-life in a sort of a broad sense, but without being religious at all. and, and speaking for that community. It was fascinating to me.
Yeah. You said something, Dave, that reminded me. There was a long article in the New Yorker a couple weeks ago about declining birth rates around the world. And they went to South Korea, where like no one is having babies at all. And that if you're to take a purely rational, coldly calculating approach to life, like, yes, you should never have children under any circumstances. They're loud.
They
And
suck.
yeah, they're expensive. They
Yeah.
can be boring. They're not going to
Yeah.
take care of you.
They'll ruin church if you're a
They'll
churchgoer.
pretty much ruin your
They'll
life.
ruin everything. Yeah.
But
No
it was
comment.
striking because he was
They will
the author
send you
was
into
saying,
a murderous rage.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. I did kind of wish, because I think the biggest church in the world is in South Korea. It's like 250,000 members or something, and I'd be interested to hear how that church is tackling this issue. But this author was saying it's getting to the point in South Korea now where, like, at least the majority, and probably a significant majority of adults in that culture, have never held a baby in their
Oh my
arms.
gosh.
And until babies don't really make sense until you hold one,
Right.
and then you're like, oh, okay, this is crazy. This is insane. And not to say that, like, postpartum depression isn't a thing and like that, but
But if you didn't have the baby, you don't experience that, and
that's
you just
true.
hold
That's
the
right.
baby. I
That
mean,
you just
like,
hold a baby.
and babies
It's a
are like incredible.
miracle.
Yeah, yeah.
And talk about surprise and the unexpected, and yeah. So on the
Yeah.
other side of life, it just it's sad.
Yeah, sorry, Sarah.
I think, and I love that you said this about babies, because I think we are disgusted at the idea of being a burden.
Babies
And
are
we're
not so much.
disgusted the idea. Babies aren't, but we're disgusted by the idea of having burden, right, in our lives.
Mm.
And I think the good news is, like, we are never a burden to God.
Mm.
Yeah. Or it's a privilege to be a burden to God.
It's a
Or
privilege
like
to be a burden to God. Yeah, I think that's probably the
we
better
want
way
to
to
be
put
the
it.
one to
Yeah.
bring the casserole. We don't want the casserole brought to us.
Yeah.
And yet, if you've been in that situation, I think
Yeah, that's all communion is. So
means
No, I'm just
the
kidding.
Well, I'm uncomfortable
love it.
judging this guy's decision, like very uncomfortable about it. But I also, he's a decision. He's the one who taught me
I'm
so much
not.
about decision making,
Mm-hmm.
being a matter of impulse rather than self awareness. And I think that as he wrote, he was just as, you know, he was motivated in the same way that you and I are motivated, which is not actually by what we say we're doing, but deeper gut intuitions and egos and fears and all this stuff. Anyway. I still recommend his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And, judgment isn't always the end of the world. I think of this final piece. This is from David Clay. This is called A Mercy Hidden in Judgment. He talks about being in St. Louis and passing panhandlers constantly. He said, I found that when I gave them money, I was often met with insistent demands for more. I grew cynical. I started noticing the same faces at different locations. It occurred to me that most of these guys were professionals, and this was not an industry I wished to support any further. So I didn't. I came to largely ignore these men as I went about my business. On one ordinary night, as I drove home from work, I stopped at a busy intersection about a mile from my apartment. Predictably enough, there was a man standing at the corner dressed in an old jacket and a beanie, holding up a cardboard sign bearing some haphazard Sharpie scribblings. I noticed this man, however, because he looked unwell, perhaps physically ill, perhaps just exhausted, perhaps something else entirely. For the first time in what felt like a while, I felt a twinge of responsibility, but in the end, I just looked away. That is, I looked away until I sensed another figure walking up to him. This figure, this second man, appeared to be homeless. He was dressed like the first man, but had a gruff, unshaven face. He strode with purpose up to the other man, who immediately leaned on him for support. As the newcomer helped the unwell man walk away, he suddenly turned and locked eyes with me. Whereupon he flipped me the bird. Throughout my life, there have been only a handful of occasions in which I felt very strongly that God was speaking to me directly.
Ugh.
This is one of them. He goes on to talk about Kendrick Lamar's song, How Much a Dollar Cost, in which the same exact thing, a narrator encounters a sort of a drunken wino at a gas station. And after he finally decides, I'm not going to give you money, then does the homeless man reveal himself to be the Messiah, the Son of Jehovah, Christ himself, who then informs the narrator exactly how much him not giving that dollar cost. It cost him his spot in heaven.
Mm.
Dollar is easily interpreted as a kind of midrash on Jesus' parable of the sheep and goats, insofar as his listeners had ignored the least of these, suffering in their midst, they had ignored Jesus. This is what Clay writes. He says, in his mercy, God shows us ourselves well before the final judgment. When I got that revelatory middle finger at that traffic stop, I could no longer hide the reality that I had closed my heart to my fellow man, which is to say, I had closed my heart to Christ. And so I received a gift in the form of an obscene gesture, the slightest hint of divine rejection that cut through my cynicism and self-justification, that exposed the state of my heart. I learned or relearned what I think Lamar has also sensed, that to taste the worst possible ultimate fate in the here and now is a profound mercy. The goats in the parable had unwittingly ignored Christ, but Christ will not be so easily ignored. God's judgment is not a doctrine that is easy to celebrate, but when we neglect it altogether, we lose a precious treasure, the recognition that God's wrath is not only an eschatological reality, but also the very means by which he shows us his greatest mercy. The love that will not let me go is at its strongest when it's concealed as rejection. What a story. What an interesting parable. Sarah, I'd love to hear what you think about this.
This is so good. I mean, I'm like, I never like when the Christian life feels very cut and dry, when sort of we're like, this is how we treat these people. And this is like, when we become legalistic, we miss out on the nuance of the Holy Spirit.
Mm.
And like, I just, it makes the Christian life so much more interesting, because there are Christians who are like, oh, you must make eye contact with every homeless person and you must give them the money in your pocket and you must. And then there are other Christians that are like, I'm not of this world and like we have government programs, and neither of those are right?
Mm.
Because it's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And God loves the complication. God lives in the complication. And when we are willing to let ourselves step into that, or when God just flips us off,
Mm-hmm.
That's actually when I feel like there's like a moment when like all the constructs we've kind of put on the world fall away and you get to see just a glimpse of how it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just beautiful. I mean, that's the thing, right?
And that's what I think David got here in
Yeah.
this piece. And it just goes to
So
what you
good.
think is happening at any given moment and what's actually happening are very rarely the same thing. And that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to deal with what Kahneman is sort of, you're collecting the data and observable reality, and you think, well, what about what the mercy hidden in judgment that David Clay
Dave.
talks about is, to me, it's a
Yeah.
very, very powerful thing, that God
Yeah.
only works with these preconditions or something like that. He had to have this experience. Anyway, RJ, any thoughts from you?
I feel convicted, because I've been in both those places Sarah's talked about in seasons of my life, where it's like, Jesus says, "Give to all who ask," so give to all who ask.
Mhm.
And then in our church we have a downtown church in a city with a significant homeless population, and we do our best to serve people and welcome them into church. And we also want to make sure that people are safe. And we've had some people who clearly are struggling with some mental illness and have gotten sort of physically threatening, that we've had to sort of ask not to come to church because it's not safe, or people haven't felt safe. So
Sure.
I don't know. I feel convicted, and I feel like I'm doing everything wrong, to be honest with you.
You are. That's the
Exactly.
good news.
Exactly.
We're all doing everything wrong, and we have
Yeah,
no
we're all
control.
doing-
And the best thing we can do is submit to it and see God.
I
in
will
the
say
midst.
I do experience some freedom in those moments where I'm just like, oh man, this is impossible.
Yeah.
It is impossible. Like, that's what it means to be a human being. It's impossible. And God is gracious anyway, and present, and shows up in the midst of impossible situations. So,
And in Kendrick's song, he sort of says, maybe this will teach you something about yourself. You can embrace the truth of, of what you need, and that it let it be. This is not the final judgment.
yeah.
and that sometimes God's mercy comes wrapped as a judgment. I think that shouldn't be a prescription to go out judging people, but this
No,
these
or as a
encounters-
failure. God's mercy comes as a failure.
Yeah.
The thing which you
yeah.
most fear happens, and then it turns out to be the most merciful thing that could have happened. And
Yeah.
there's life on the other side.
Yeah, whether that's dealing with your trying to protect your children,
Yeah.
or trying to follow a trend. I don't want to wrap it up too tightly, but I think that there's something counterintuitive, but also supremely hopeful,
Mhm.
despite that sometimes all we look at is we see out the world is judgment and pressure and demand, and it could be that, and it often is, that I think God is present in that for the sake of mercy and grace. So
Yeah.
guys, I hope have a great spring break. RJ, I'm off
Thank
the week
you.
after that, but we'll be back here again in a few weeks, and just wishing everyone a nice spring and all that
A blessed Lent.
and yeah,
A blessed
and
Lent.
as few toxic preconditions as you can
That's right.
you can handle. So
That's
thank you
right.
guys. Great to be with you.
All right. Bye,
All right.
y'all.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.